Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Halsey, Senior Industry Marketing Manager at Dragos. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give everyone just a moment to join us, and then we'll get started. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, A Real-World Roadmap for Continuous Cybersecurity Improvement, Amgen's story. Again, I'm Jennifer Halsey, Senior Industry Marketing Manager here at Dragos. A couple of housekeeping items today. One, the session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out after the webinar. Two, your lines have been muted, but we still want you to interact with us. Please use the Q&A chat to submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. We'll make sure to get answers back to you, even if we don't have time to do it in today's recording. We'll also leave a few minutes for Q&A at the end. Now, I'd like to introduce our panel of presenters today. First, we have David Pessoa, Principal OT Security Engineer at Amgen. We also have Darren Lenski, Principal OT Security Architect at Amgen. We have Kimberly Graham, Senior Director of Product Management at Dragos. And finally, we have Jose Gibiu, Principal IS Architect at Amgen. Before we turn it over to David, let's dig into a little background about Amgen. Amgen is one of the world's leading biotech companies with a presence in more than 100 countries and regions. Building on advances in recombinant DNA and molecular biology, Amgen is one of the early pioneers of biotechnology. Today, they focus on 6 therapeutic areas: cardiovascular disease, oncology, bone health, neuroscience, nephrology, and inflammation. Amgen credits its success to building a culture that embraces science and innovation. But to bring innovation to life and to bring life-saving medicines to populations around the world, the company must also develop a strong vision for keeping its manufacturing and production processes secure. That's where today's panel comes in. Amgen is on a transformative journey to strengthen its OT cybersecurity, and we're excited to learn more about that journey from our panel of experts. David, let's start with you. Tell us about the strategy and vision that Amgen developed for its OT cybersecurity program.
Thank you, Jennifer. I've actually had the privilege of being with Amgen now for over 20 years. And so I'm going to share with you some of the insight of what it was like as we traversed the journey of becoming more resilient. I think for several of you that were in the cybersecurity business in 2017, you know that NotPetya really changed everything, because NotPetya, I think, was the first malware where the impact, the financial cost of NotPetya to a single organization would run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so I'm going to talk to you about that journey. And also later that year in 2017, some of you will remember that We also had Hurricane Maria hit the island of Puerto Rico and causing that island to become isolated. And so there were lessons learned from that as well that we later incorporated into what started out being named the NotPetya program. We changed it to the Enterprise Cyber Resilience Program. So I'll go first. Darren Lensky, my colleague, will do a double click on Amgen, and then Kimberly will talk about Dragos in general. And then finally, Jose Giboyo will talk about what we were doing to sustain that investment in becoming more resilient. So how we got here. So this is actually the slide that we showed back in August of 2017, after NotPetya had gotten hit. I remember we were in the basement of building 24 of the Thousand Oaks campus, Thousand Oaks, California campus of Amgen, in what's called the London Underground. And it's called that because of the previous CISO was British, and so it made sense to give it that name. But the then CISO in 2017 called me into his office, and he said, David, I'm going to have you work on a program that's visible to the board of directors. And so in all my years of Amgen, I had never really had the privilege of doing something that was that visible. And then he talked to me about NotPetya. We already knew quite a bit about it. And he had about 5 themes in mind that he felt that we needed to tackle to make Amgen more resilient. And so I brainstormed with him, how do we approach this? How do we make this happen at Amgen? And we knew that, cybersecurity really is a conversation, a partnership you have with the business. You have to build cybersecurity into everything you do, and it can't be thought of as separate. And so we decided that, these 5 themes really should become a workshop where we invite representatives from each area of Amgen. So he reached out to his colleague, which at the time they were called the IS leadership team. And then we had representatives from commercial, from operations or manufacturing, from R&D, from really the entire company. And then we had 3 workshops where we focused on that theme. And then the agenda was really, we followed an agenda that's fairly typical for what's called a catalyst session. And a catalyst session usually goes like this. You talk about why you're here, how you arrived. In this case, it was definitely all about NotPetya. You establish ground rules, and you really spend a lot of time understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you brainstorm questions. What is it that you're afraid of? What are the risks? What are the fears that you have? So everyone participates in that. And then you affinitize, you group them into categories. And then within those categories, the whole team brainstorms ideas. What should we do? Because again, Amgen was already on a path of maturing its processes, of becoming more resilient. But now you have to take into account that the world changed. And so as you brainstorm those ideas, you estimate, you want to do the ideas that cost the least, that give you the highest return on investment, and then easiest to implement. And so we had a portfolio of ideas, and our CISO really believes in optionality, so he built the portfolio into 3 options. The first option was really the cost of doing business. Look, the world changed, NotPetya is out there, that type of threat. This is what we must do. We already have a pretty good sized budget for cybersecurity, and then here's how we're going to spend the money. So the next option was higher level of investment. We called it the good option. So the good option had more investment in becoming more resilient, and even more in terms of being able to recover after some sort of drastic event. And then the third option was like our best option. And this is what we felt are companies that do digital for a living, like banks, like an Amazon, they have that kind of level of investment because to them, digital is everything. And so he put that case together, he took it to our CFO, and then he took it to our board of directors. And the board of directors really understood that the world had changed because of NotPetya. And so he was funded all the way to the highest level. And then those 5 themes that we started out actually grew into 8 themes. And then you see them here. So I'll walk you through some of what the projects were within those themes. So within the theme of segregation segmentation, we had an idea that you don't want activity in a riskier area of the company, like the enterprise or business network, to affect your more sensitive areas like your manufacturing network. So we had already segregated them, separated them, but we knew that they were connected because some systems required connectivity between those two networks. And then some individuals would actually log on to both networks. And before this program, they used the same credentials. So we said, well, you don't want a compromise of credentials on one network to be able to propagate to the other. So we did identity segregation. So if you have the need to be on both networks, you're not going to use the same username and password. You're going to have dedicated ones. And even for the concept of, especially our domain administrators, people who can really make a lot of change to the environment. Those individuals we segregated, to the point that they have two laptops, one laptop to do their enterprise work, and then a different laptop to do their domain administration work, so that there's no way that malware can propagate from one environment to the next. When Hurricane Maria hit the island of Puerto Rico, it really was like a drawbridge, that was up because the island was isolated. And so we also brainstormed, well, what if you use drawbridge to protect the site from malware, getting into it? And then as the idea matured, we realized that, I think even better than that would be to sever the connectivity between the enterprise network and the manufacturing network. So systems that depended on that connectivity being alive obviously would be impacted. But we felt that capability was more important. So that's what CyberBridge Up means. And that's what we have to exercise at each site. Now, as I move on to the third theme of business continuity, it's the realization also that no matter how much money you invest in defenses, if a nation state like Russia, in Russia, it was fairly quickly, they attributed NotPetya to Russia, a Russia attack on the Ukraine, it really foreshadowed today's situation that we have between Russia and Ukraine. Even if you have very strong defenses, a nation state targets you, they will compromise your systems. And so the best you can do is make sure that they compromise of one area cannot propagate to the other. And also our executive vice president in charge of manufacturing, of operations, he wanted to make sure that even if our computer systems were down and they couldn't be recovered very quickly, we could still ship product manually. Like Jennifer mentioned at the opening, we have certain drugs, drugs that stimulate the growth of red blood cells. And red blood cells is what gives you energy. And so you can imagine if you can't take this drug, you don't even have energy to get out of bed. We have drugs that stimulate the growth of white blood cells. So without white blood cells, an infection could kill you. And so every patient, every time, that mission for Amgen is a life and death mission. And so having the ability to ship product manually is something that we really needed to develop, because as much as we have defense of our systems, we can't count on that defense working always 100% of the time. On number 4, resilient technology, we also realized that an event like a hurricane taking down communications to the island, Amgen needed to invest in its own communication infrastructure because communication is such a key aspect of crisis management. If I talk about 5 and 6, many times the malware is able to propagate, not necessarily because of a 0 day that no one knows about, but probably because of some vulnerability for which there has been a patch, but you just haven't gotten around to applying that patch. And we know that's true even more so in OT, because it's very difficult many times to get the downtime to install patches. Now our later plants, more sophisticated ones, we invest in high availability so that we can patch the secondary, fail over to the secondary, patch the primary, so that our patching cadence, even in OT, mirrors that of in IT. We're not there at every place, but that's our target. But of course, as you patch more, you also need to test more because you're doing more frequently. So automating that test is something that we do to this day. Amgen, like any company, we invest quite a bit in terms of our endpoint security tools, tools that are able to detect malware and stop it. But we realize also if the attacker is really clever, they will hide behind legitimate processes. And so we invested in tools like allow listing that would show what is allowed to run. The software will run for several weeks, and then it goes into enforcement mode. And that's another defense in-depth approach that Amgen, and I'm sure several of you use. And then finally, in terms of recovery, after we came up with a portfolio of ideas that we wanted to invest in, we actually hired a third party to give us an opinion on our portfolio. Did we have the right amount of investment in the different areas in defense and recovery? And they noted to us that about 40% was investing in recovery technology. So of course you do want to prevent, because that's much more efficient. But you need to also have the humility to say that if a nation state is determined to target you, they will get through. So be ready to recover quickly. And then at the time, we already had Windows 10 deployed on all of our laptops. And one of the features of Windows 10 is that you can do remote formatting, remote reconfiguring. And so even if a NotPetya type of attack hit Amgen, where we lost thousands of end user workstations of laptops at once, we could recover those thousands in a matter of hours, not days. And so that is something actually that we're very proud of as well. So next, I'll turn it over to Darren to do a double click on Amgen.
Thank you, David. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So David laid out quite the roadmap, and me with a IT background, focusing on a lot of these challenges, a lot of things came to light, and so I'm going to point some out. So the differences between IT and OT. Again, I come from the IT side, so there was a lot to learn when it came to OT. First of all, we're taught about the CIA model: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, while confidentiality is important, especially to a company like Amgen, where we need to protect our intellectual property, what we find in OT is that availability is pretty high on the list, along with reliability and safety in some areas. So approaching this project in that way was definitely enlightening. Learned about different technologies and processes. So what we run into are technologies like PLCs, HMIs, RTUs. They operate differently than what we're used to on the IT side. The lifetime of these systems is a lot longer. There's also limited downtime that you can have to deal with patching or maintenance of these systems. And so with these different technologies, we find different protocols, things like Modbus TCP, Siemens S7. And again, the confidentiality isn't taken into account with those protocols. So you can essentially be able to read the protocol off the network, or even send write commands or set configurations from anywhere on the network. And so that poses some challenges, because authentication, encryption, again, not built into these technologies. Being able to have visibility into the network, understanding what's communicating between the business and manufacturing, or between manufacturing and the internet. Inconsistent deployment of our security tools, knowing that some systems may be logging, but are they logging the right information? Where are they logging to? Are they all logging to the same place? One story that I was thinking about was I was on site working on a demo, and the engineer was showing me their system, and all of a sudden an antivirus warning popped up saying that it was out of date, and he quickly dismissed it. And it came to light that it's been like that for a long time, and it just showed that we didn't have the full visibility of where our tools were deployed to be able to understand the landscape and the systems that we're protecting, and if they're fully covered. Shared infrastructure, limited segmentation. So prior to going in, again, segmentation was limited. We may have had VLANs in some places, but that would probably be from the requirements of the vendor. In order to meet low latency requirements, they were all on their own VLANs, but there was no segmentation between them, no access control, limiting what could communicate between one VLAN and another. Weak access control was another thing. The either default credentials, no credentials at all, open access to various areas of the network. So from an availability perspective, it was great for an engineer, because if they needed to work on a system, they would be able to access the system from anywhere. However, that's also advantageous to an attacker as well, that from anywhere in the network, they can access the same systems. Timing issues. So as we're proceeding to implement all these new technologies, these new architectures, these new frameworks, being able to get downtime is very challenging. There are some areas of the network where you could have even less than an hour's worth of downtime to make numerous impactful changes. So you had to plan in advance in hopes that you could get a decent change window to make a lot of the changes that we're hoping to make. So David went through and mentioned a lot of the controls and features that the program meant to tackle. And while I could probably talk for hours on each of them, I selected some that really resonate. So segmentation. What we found successful was adding segmentation, putting that segmentation between the business and OT, firewalls, actually putting access control between those different segments, those VLANs, because process A doesn't care about process B, and adding the segmentation allows us to control the blast radius or limit lateral movement. Again, the impetus of this whole program. What we set out to do is we created a blueprint that we could have a reusable architecture for all of our sites based on the Purdue model, and we created a small, medium, large. So as we went through and evaluated and assessed each site, we had a plan going in for how the network and security controls would be applied to each site. IR plan. So this is us planning for when something happens, when there's going to be an event. We have a really good IR team and playbooks for the IT network, but it was practically non-existent for anything OT. So we rewrote or wrote from scratch playbooks specific to OT based on threats at the time that we needed to focus on. And one of the benefits of this IR plan, what we came out of it was a commitment to perform regular tabletop exercises, penetration tests, and red team. And so this helps build into that culture of Amgen our ability to bring cyber into the fold. And another really important thing that came from this is that as part of our normal business resilience program, where each site is focusing on their own disaster recovery plans, is that we've now been able to embed a cyber component into this as well. So when the DR exercise, say, is tackling an outbreak of a fire, there's now this cyber component where cyber can now get involved and be involved in the sense that was this fire due to a cyber event? And so it increases that culture as we move along. Multi-factor authentication. This one's huge. As we now have the segmentation and we're trying to control access in and out of manufacturing, any of these remote accesses that we need from business to manufacturing, we have this layer of multi-factor authentication. And as David mentioned, having separate identities for manufacturing as well, it's definitely a huge win. OT specific visibility. So now that we have segmentation, part of the segmentation and that blueprint we created were for choke points, certain areas where we can lock in and focus our visibility. And now we can have better ideas of what threats and what traffic is coming in and leaving the networks, and having the ability to understand what the assets are and get more focus on some of these OT specific protocols, as I mentioned before, Modbus, TCP, Siemens S7, the list goes on. And another interesting feature that we can get are, as these instruments report back, we can understand the process and the values over time that these processes generate. So if you see a drive spinning at a particular RPM, over time, you can see if there is any drift in that. And from a cyber perspective, that could indicate, you know, if there was something tampered with that would cause such a huge drift in that. Safe listing security tooling. So we have an awesome team here at Amgen that has been able to deploy this highly effective control. With a lot of these purpose-built systems, a system that may only run one or two applications, will be able to use this safe listing or allow listing technology to only run those specific applications. So in the event that something else is trying to get introduced to run on those systems, it would be stopped. So that's huge. Not just IT, security, or technology. So as David mentioned, being able to have a resilient architecture that doesn't always rely on technology. The ship product manually, as he mentioned before, huge. Lots of PowerPoint slide decks. Definitely what I want to focus on here is the communication, either communicating up or down, communicating progress. When we are talking about new security tools, new technologies, we're able to talk about the impact and what these tools and controls do. And it opens up the conversation, allows us to talk about our intent, but also listen to what's important to the stakeholders. And one of the things that I found effective was always putting in tidbits of current events, either something specific to IoT or when Windows 7 end of life was announced, to show cyber and how it's related in today's landscape. So what really made this program a success, as David mentioned, that top leadership support, the commitment to make this happen all the way from the top. You have to remember that this is Amgen's business, Amgen's ability to make drugs and ship them. These are the people, the processes, the technology, all to make this happen. So from security's perspective, we need to be the enabler because we need to protect Amgen's ability to manufacture, produce, and deliver product. And so we started by assessing, developed and implemented controls, and so now here we are, maintain. It's a good thing to implement the controls, but how do you know if they're effective? So we need to constantly evaluate the controls, test the controls, evaluate, look for gaps, and find out how and where we can do better, and constantly test and enhance that. So again, why Dragos? They're a strategic partner. They're a leader in the space. They provide valuable community education and valuable insights to threats, respective to OT. Thank you, and I will pass it.
Thanks so much. So next up is Kimberly, and we're going to hear about how Dragos focuses on OT cybersecurity and how we can help companies like Amgen along their cyber journey.
Thank you. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about Dragos. You know, again, there is a Q&A, so if there are questions that come up, please use that and let us know. So a little bit about Dragos. So we're founded in 2016 by the folks that created the ICS program for the U.S. government, and they've had that focus well before then. Of course, they've had it since then. We've grown a lot, so we've grown a lot since then. Over 500 employees, over 300 customers, really all around the globe. Every vertical that you could count, really, for for critical infrastructure. So we've built our platform, our services, everything around kind of the practitioner viewpoint, because our team is a bunch of practitioners and ex-practitioners. So we say built for practitioners by practitioners, because that's the truth behind it. So talk a little bit about how that works into our services and our platform. So Dragos platform is the core to everything. That's the core to what we do. It helps us to enable what we're doing with the community. We do have a very community-focused mission. We say safeguarding civilization, because that's what we're doing. So everything that we're doing, we try to feed back as much as we can into the community. And I'll talk about our Keeper program, which kind of shows how we're doing that, how we're leveraging the platform for that. The platform itself is highly integrated into our OT threat intelligence that we're well known for, as well as our services. That's where we're actually there, doing threat hunting and incident response and all of those things. And we'll talk about that. But all that's basically centered around this Dragos platform. So the platform does a few things, and there's some different use cases that we tend to call out. One of them being visibility. So visibility over assets, the traffic, which is the communication between assets, between zones, between Purdue levels, and so on, as well as visibility into vulnerabilities. So which vulnerabilities are in this environment. Detection, the ability for us to detect the compromises, any type of threat behaviors, focus on threat behaviors there. We're not just taking an IOC feed. We do produce IOC feeds. And of course, we do use our own IOC feeds. But we operationalize the intelligence that we build in a very unique way inside the platform that allows us to really, truly look at behaviors. And then we've got a response, which is the forensics, the investigation playbooks and things that allow you to build cases. And we give you, kind of what to do when these different events come up. All of this, of course, goes into our neighborhood keeper, which I'll talk a little bit more about. That's where we can, leverage anonymous data to help, share information with the community as much as possible. And of course, our OT watch, which is a managed threat hunting and response. We'll talk about how that can help you operationalize within your program. So we divide up the use cases of the platform into 4 categories. Asset visibility is kind of key, and you've already heard that from Darren and David. Being able to see assets in the environment, knowing where the crown jewels, what's communicating with what, all those things are very important, kind of just as a baseline. Vulnerability management, of course, is critical, but it's different. Something that you've heard kind of over and over again is that IT and OT are very different. This is one of the places where it's kind of an extreme difference. You're not going to patch every single OT vulnerability, in your environment, because you have that discrepancy between the operational risk versus security risk. So it's very different. There's no, lifting an IT program and shoving it into OT and saying we're good, or we'll just modify it, we'll tweak it. It takes effort, and again, that's what you saw David talk about and Darren go through some of the details. So vulnerability management, we provide that directly on the platform and tell you the vulnerabilities, and we rank them. We rank the vulnerabilities based on our OT expertise. So it's not just us importing CVSS and doing a conversion. We'll provide CVSS if you need that. We actually correct CVSS because a lot of times the vendors click the wrong buttons. But we'll also provide the actual curated kind of feed of a Dragos risk level that is our opinion on the vulnerability that you can choose to leverage within your program. Of course, we've got a threat detection, looking at not just traffic. We can see traffic flowing from point A to point B. That could be that could be a problem. If, you're seeing remote access not coming through remote access network, that's a problem. But we're also looking at every single, file that we can get our hands on. We're looking at behaviors over time. Does this look like activity that maps to an attacker, working with different device types? And we leverage, what we see in terms of assets and also our characterization of those assets in the threat detections, where we're looking at the actual adversary behaviors. And then our incident investigation capabilities is, again, around having the playbooks and taking the expertise that we have in the field and pulling that in. I'll build this out. So this is, there's kind of a unique way that we pull this information in because we have that team of, threat intelligence. We have the largest, we have the largest group of OT security practitioners that there is. Our intel group They provide research. They do research into all these different threat groups. They look at different campaigns. Again, all of that comes through things like Worldview, where we expose the raw threat information, but we operationalize it here in this platform to where we can say, okay, this is actually the hacker behavior, and here's how we can detect it within there. And of course, we'll stream in IOCs and TTPs and the standard things that you would expect as well. And then our services group, they're of course pulling in the things like incident response. So if we're doing incident response, that's knowledge that we either already have or are getting better at over time with some of this, because there's a lot of changes, even in OT, there are changes over time. So we're continuing to get that experience, continuing to see new attacks, continuing to handle those incidents within these real world environments. That makes it into playbooks that are in the platform. I talked a bit about OT Watch. OT Watch is our managed service for helping operationalize. We'll talk about how that really will help you operationalize, but it's a team of actually experienced industrial threat hunters, incident responders that will curate all the visibility components. So to make sure you have the right maps, you have exactly what we want to look to, make sure that you're, that someone's looking at the various threats as they're coming in, doing threat hunting, and then triaging all of that as it comes in. We've already built our platform to not give you alert fatigue. We're not throwing high severity things at you all the time. There's an additional layer of curation toward maybe they'll be diving into some of the lower severity things to see what needs to escalate up or down. Then we have our neighborhood keeper. This is that community-wide. This is the community visibility collective defense. That's a lot of words to just say that it's information sharing, but it's anonymous. We know that this data is sensitive, so we make this completely anonymous, but it gives you visibility into kind of what's going on, not just for yourself, but what's going on in my industry, what's going on in my region, combination of industry and region. It gives you a safe way to interact with government, with industry partners, without having to, not be anonymous or de-anonymize yourselves. So it's opt-in. You don't have to be in the program. We encourage people to. We don't know who's in the program. It's anonymous, and that's on purpose. And we provide that through this keeper program. We also like to talk about the 5 critical controls, and just listening to what David and Darren went through. They focused on these different areas. We heard a lot of this stuff. An ICS specific incident response plan. The key there is ICS specific, not just your IT incident response plan. It's going to be different. So you have to build that specific one. Defensible architecture. We heard about network segmentation and all those things. You have to be able to defend the architecture, and that includes things like segmentation, other controls. Network security monitoring. It's obviously where our platform comes in, but you have to be able to monitor everywhere throughout that environment. And then we heard about, the MFA side, secure remote access and MFA. MFA is critical. You can't have somebody that leaves the organization and they've got keys to the kingdom in their pocket. This is something that you have to validate. And then lastly, vulnerability management. So key vulnerability management program. The focus here is key. It's not just, let's handle all the vulnerabilities. We'll fix everything that's a CVSS 4 or higher. This is, let's focus on actually vulnerabilities that are really, truly a threat to an OT environment. And that's what we can provide out of the box to make sure that we're enabling you to make decisions on not just vulnerabilities, but key vulnerabilities. So then the way we get that into a, operationalize that kind of into a OT security program is we start with things like baselining. So you can use our platform to do that, of course. We have the services engagements to look at architecture assessments, help you with incident response plans, start organizing the asset inventory, start building things like maps so you understand how data is flowing. And then moving into more operationalized status. We're looking at specifically different types of network traffic and crown jewels, leveraging those maps and continuing to curate that data. Looking at vulnerabilities, starting to look at the vulnerabilities generated from the asset data you're collecting, and then being able to actually respond to OT incidents. Again, very different than your IT incidents. And then lastly, we get into the optimization phase. We're kind of expanding, looking at deploying more broadly to find other areas where, that could be at risk, and then starting to do some integration between the OT security program and the IT security program. But you have to get that OT security program functional and working before you can do that type of integration. And then work into control validation, and we can do a lot of that again within the platform. Is traffic flowing through here? Should this be blocked by a firewall? What kind of user accounts are we seeing flowing through the network? Is remote access being leveraged for remote access? The approved solution and so on. So that's what we can do. And again, I was happy to see, looking at David and Darren's presentation, this is it. This is basically the process that they've gone through. Establishing the baseline, kind of understanding what you're trying to do, creating some of this initial stuff up front, and then starting to operationalize and optimize. And then lastly, if this sounds like a lot to do, it is a lot to do. We of course have our OT Watch service where we can help accelerate this. With a combination of our services and OT Watch, we can make sure that you're leveraging the platform as effectively as possible to actually get to that later stage of optimization. So lastly, there's a lot to see here. You don't have to read the slide, but it's basically, we've got our Dragos platform, our services, our threat intelligence are all aligned to really those categories. Visibility. What do I see in my environment? You heard that word several times already throughout the presentations. Visibility is key. And then the detection. How do I know if I'm compromised or have a threat in the environment? The only way to do detection is to have visibility. And then response, you have to know what to do. You detect it, what do you do with it? And of course, our services can help you. You can leverage our platform, our own services teams use our platform. Any of the threat intelligence that actually can drive that. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll be going through the questions that are in there, and we'll of course talk more at the end. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. We appreciate it. Last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Jose, whose work at Amgen has included bringing cybersecurity into the culture there, which we've found is something that companies don't spend enough time on. So we're excited to hear, Jose, how Amgen has operationalized cyber into your DNA. Jose, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Yes.
we gotcha.
Okay, sorry about that. I just had a technical difficulties here with the application. Thank you, everyone. So what I'm going to talk about is basically how the sustainability of this cyber resilience program that we just talked about. And basically, this didn't happen overnight, right? This was a 3-year program from the time that it was approved until it was closing late the end of 2021. And the question came up of we did all this work, we have to make sure we can sustain it, right? And keep it. What do we do to sustain this? Make sure it keeps it doesn't deteriorate over time, right? You can do the best work at the beginning. If you don't maintain it, it's going to fall apart eventually. It's like your car. If you don't change the oil, it's going to fall apart, right? So you have to do some maintenance. So basically, we created a life cycle management and was based on 4 core principles, right? The governance, strengthening the procedures, audit and accountability and integration. And I'm not saying that none of these didn't exist before. It was there. It was just adjusted and improved as part of the program, right? For example, on the area of people, we hire about 34 new staff just to support this globally, right? Among them is my group, and we created a new position called IS security engineers, and we're not working with we're part of the operations side of of IS, not the information security. We work hand in hand with global information security with Darren and David, but we're closer to the sites, right? Each engineer is based on at the site at each of the sites, so they know their network, they know the people there, and they know the operation, right? And that's the whole idea. So when anything related to cybersecurity comes up on the OT world, that connection that lies on between the IS or GI, Global Information Protection, and the operations side. That's all I have to say here. And basically the other part is the process, right? We create a process. We have, like we were mentioning, we have the blueprints. We have the GLAM program, which is basically life cycle management, just making sure that everything is up to date and the latest and greatest version that can be. And that's running continuously. We have projects to replace end of life equipment, operating systems, and all that. That's happening continuously. And guides, and we were talking again that we as part of the ECR, a whole bunch of guides were created on incident and IR, or even managing the changes that we did to the segmentation. We created all that documentation, and we're keeping it up, and then the tools that we already talked about before. Let me go to the next slide. And then basically, again, the operating model here, it's not only one group working on it, is basically multiple groups trying maintaining this, right? This is the operations side, which is the one I represent. We have information security, which is basically represented here by David and Darren, and infrastructure, which they implemented a lot. Infrastructure group also takes care of the patching and all that part. So it's not only one group that we have to continuously work together, and we organize in a certain manner that I'll talk about a little bit later. And again, the business value here is with this program, basically, and that's why it was signed up for, right, by the management. It's like we have reduced the residual risk has decreased greatly from where we were 5 years ago, 2017, to where we are right now. Sorry, didn't change. Here we go. And again, as far as that governance, that Cyber COE Center of Excellence team was created, and basically this gives guidance to our team on what we should be focusing our energy on, and what projects we should pursue, right? And we're not doing everything. Again, we're not doing this alone. My team cannot do all these projects. We usually, like I said, we are a liaison between all the other teams. We drive many of these projects. We coordinate between the different areas, right? The architects, the work stream leads, and the site leads, right? So I think a good example would be what Darren was talking about of the whitelisting software we installed. A lot of that coordination was with between the team. We had basically weekly meetings with the team, answering questions, and whenever a system owner had questions, many times they come to us first. And if I couldn't answer the question, I would make sure that we had meetings and Q&A meetings, so they understand how their system was going to be impacted, right? You really, as a system owner, you freak out when you say, oh, we're going to put a system in that might stop a program from running in your automation system in production. You know, the system owners go, no, I don't want it in, right? You have to explain to them how it works, how it's going to be set up, and the whole process. And since we have that background, that connection, it's easier for us to know what the concerns are going to be ahead of time, so we can answer the questions, right? Again, like Darren was saying, again, the OT was a bit different from the IT. We're using the same computers one. And then this is something we Amgen been working on, and this is how we are organized. And basically, this year we started with this, right? I think we've been it's working as an agile team, right? So my team and David's team and the CI, the Global Infrastructure team, were organized as agile teams. We're following the SAFE framework for the SAFE framework for lean enterprises, right? And this started this year, like I said. So we right now we're doing our second product interval. Basically, a product interval is an interval of 10 to 12 weeks, and we plan our work around those, right? And we do sprints of 2 weeks. So it's been now I think we're starting to get the hang of it, and it's been challenging, but it's proven to be a very good way of working. And again, I'm saying it's been challenging because when you read all this, if you know a little bit of Agile and Scrum, Scrum comes from the software world, right? And when you're talking about services and what the type of work we do, it doesn't really fit perfectly right away. You have to tweak it a little bit and learn how. So it took a lot of training. But again, this is coming from the top of our organization. So we had plenty of training. We have a coach assigned to us. And it's been a journey. We're still in the process of learning, and I think we're starting to hit our stride on this. And this is across all the teams, right? And again, this is not something we started last year from zero, right? Amgen's been working with agile teams and Scrum on other groups where it applies really well, right? Any software groups that are really mature on this. I know about a year ago we started doing it for product teams for MES, for example, to handle the upgrades and that type of project work, which this really fits really well for too also. And then we just started working on it ourselves now. Oops, sorry. And again, this is basically kind of they are working, right? The stakeholders, right? We have the steering committee that basically is a cyber COE on top, and then they give us the guidance, right? And we meet with them through those PI planning sessions. Again, when you do the agile framework, part of that is including the business and making sure we provide business value to our sponsors. And those are done on those PI meetings every 10 weeks. They're also invited to what we call the demos, which in our case, sometimes we basically just communicating the progress of our work, not necessarily a physical demo or a software demo. But again, they're continuously seeing, and this 2 week sprints allow us to be very agile. Sorry to redundancy, but adapt and adjust based on any changes, conditions around us, right? And then we are in the middle, and we work with the technical partner, the service team, the site leads, and make sure that the work gets done, right? And then as part of the culture, right? Sorry, I thought I changed the screen. The other part is the culture, and we already talked about that, right? It's how the key part here is to sustain that, make sure that we keep Amgen safe and we can deliver on every patient, every time goal that we have every day, right? And we can have all the technology of the world, but the weakest link in many times is the users, right? Somebody just clicks in an email and you have a ransomware and it's all over, right? And part of that is just making sure that it's education, right? To drive that culture education. So what we do, and we're working very closely with multiple groups here, is we do cyber awareness campaigns. We post infographics related to phishing, social attacks, and all that. And every month we have a different topic, and we post it in every social media, internal social media. When I say Jammer, we have a Jammer channel. Every site, we have MS Teams. We have the TVs on every side, and we publish those on there. Also, we do phishing campaigns. Those phishing campaigns are basically unknown to everyone. So basically, you will get an email, a fake phishing email, and if you click on it, you basically get reported, right? And then we have a button to report. I see a suspicious email. You have an Outlook, a click suspicious email, report suspicious email button where you can just report it. And we have metrics on the click rates, and we have metrics on the reporting rates, and we can adjust our campaigns and also based on that. And we've been doing that continuously, right? The other thing we do is live fires and tabletop exercises. Actually today, as we speak, there's one happening in one of our sites, live fire, where we're trying, not a live, well, actually, yeah, it's been we combine a live fire and we're doing a cyber breach up today. So before this webinar, I was basically joining that meeting and seeing how it went. And the last thing is the Sentinels program. That's the site we have here. And this is basically a program where we train our staff to learn a little bit more about cybersecurity and trying to make them be advocates for cybersecurity. So it's basically, you don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be an IS person or IT person. You can be a manufacturing supervisor. You can be anyone on the facility, on the on the organization, but you know a little bit more. And as part of that, we have computer is a bit slow. There we go. So this is the Chief Sentinels program, right? So basically, again, it's you don't need any experience. The goals is basically is to have the idea is to have Chief Sentinels in every functional group. So we act right now. We just did a campaign for engineering department. So the engineering department, we did a special training for Chief Sentinel. I think we recruited about 200 to 300 people on that one, which is awesome. We did one. We're trying to do one for the QA organization. We already did one for manufacturing. And these Chief Sentinels, you don't want 100% of Chief Sentinels, because the idea is that the Chief Sentinels receive the information from global information. Let's say it's a thread, or there's it's like right now we're doing the CSAM, where we're Cybersecurity Awareness Month. All that information is distributed to them, and they share with their teammates. So you don't need 100%. You need but you want somebody or a few people from on each organization, so they can spread the word and be the evangelist, if you want to call it, right? And then if there are any questions, it's easier for them to go ask me, right? If I'm a supervisor and I have hey, I saw this email, what do I do? They already know what to do, right? And it makes it more easier versus trying to call a number or try to send an email to some random, to Global Information Security, right? So they might not do it. They have quarterly meetings, and they usually have a monthly topic, and that's basically a lot of the information that we use to propagate to the different sites also. So just keep it all synchronized. And basically the last slide I have is, this is the whole idea, right? That pyramid, right? We have the program team, the Chief Sentinels program on top, and there's a few full-time employees from the information security group. You have the Chief Sentinels. I'm sorry, I thought I switched the screen. It's not really switching. Here we go. We have the Chief Sentinels program members, which are the people that we train, and the general staff. Actually, when you are a new hire, you receive a security training as part of your curriculum, and you have to finish that in the first 30 days. So everybody gets the basics, but the Chief Sentinels get a little bit more, and they're very prepared, and they're in the loop. And basically, as you can see, we right now have about 1,400. We've been working really hard on this, and like I said, we had those targeted groups, and basically this number was around 800 not so long ago, probably last year, and we're basically getting close to doubling that. I don't know if that 1,400 includes the number I gave you before, and that's all I have to do today.
That's fantastic, Jose. Thank you so much. It reminds me of, the push in the 90s to bring safety into manufacturing plants and how successful that was over time. And, we're glad to see some companies like Amgen bringing the same kind of rigor to cybersecurity. It's certainly needed. So we do have a few questions that came in from our audience today that I want to get out while we still have some folks on the line. So Chris Woodring asks, in many organizations, the manufacturing networks are designed, built, and implemented by a separate automation engineering group and their integrator. IT must work with engineering to establish standards and responsibilities to secure these environments. What challenges did you encounter in this topic when embarking on a cybersecurity transformation? So Darren, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, the challenge really is the education and the communication, right? Similar to how Jose was just talking about the allow listing software. When you are introducing new technology, new ways of doing things, it really comes across the wrong way. So you need to be very communicative about it, and that was really the largest challenge is coming in, showing the value as a business enabler, and the reasons why you're doing it. Fortunately, we have the backing of the business and leadership behind us, but it's the communication. This is why we're doing it. What concerns do you have? And testing, essentially showing the value as well.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you guys also use technical folks to really introduce these programs to other technical folks, because I think that boosts the credibility overall. And it seems like a really successful way to do that. Another question that we had come in, this one's for David. With your cyber bridge up concept, how does that balance or complicate broader business requirements for getting data from OT assets up to the enterprise level? In short, how do you meet hyperconnectivity needs for business intelligence and data flow?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid question. And the only way that, so first you kind of hypothesize the answer. You think you know how a cyber bridge up event will impact your ability to communicate. And then of course you have to test to make sure that, the way you think it works actually works. And like Jose mentioned, we actually run those tests at the sites. You have to negotiate because you have to have a window where the business impact is acceptable. But in systems that need to have the communication between the manufacturing network and enterprise network tend to be your level 4, level 5 systems. And those systems, they're not really real time, meaning that they don't need data real time. It's not like a PLC running on the line where you measure latency in the milliseconds because it's doing PID algorithm to make sure that the set point stays where it needs to be. I actually, before I joined Amgen, I worked for a company that was a boutique batch automation company. And we had a process that we automated in a plant where we took data from SAP, our ERP system, all the way down to the PLC. And that communication was non-trivial. We had to devise a handshake of a state machine that it wasn't just on or off because of the timing that you couldn't tell. So I think it's a really good point that you make. At Amgen, the CyberBridge app, we first tested in a sandbox environment, and now we're testing slowly in negotiation with the business in the actual site, and we have to engage the application teams to test that the CyberBridge app, all the business processes and application processes are resilient to that event, so that if it does happen, we can still ensure confidentiality and integrity of the data.
That's great.
I wanted to
go ahead, Jose.
I wanted to add one. Yeah, I wanted to add one thing. The other thing is that we are not 100%. So if we do a cyber breach, it's going to be some business impact still at this point. Most of the systems after the ECR, they will keep running fine. Some of them, like Pi, will catch data at a local server and then will synchronize with the enterprise Pi. But systems like MES, we have a window where after a certain amount of time, and this depends on the site, we will have to stop operations, right? And we're working on ways to remediate that. And we have a few proof of concepts that are coming up, and we're going to see eventually where we can, after we make sure the site is safe or that application is safe, we can open that channel again. We still are not there, but we're working towards that.
That's great. Thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
Here's a question from David, and this one's for Kim. How should people be thinking about PLC firmware updates and other vulnerability management items? David mentions that updates in PLC firmware might affect the process, and most often control engineers ignore these firmware updates because we want 100% uptime. So how do you balance uptime and the updates that are necessary to some of these controls?
Okay, so I was used to be before a previous life automation engineer. I even here. So I think it's a matter of risk, right? If it's something you absolutely have to do, you will do it. We don't have a program where you do like patching program that every quarter we do go and do all the upgrades, because again, it's very, very impactful on PLCs. But we had issues where we had to update the firmware, and we just have to work with the business. And it's not easy even that, because you have to, for example, we did one for a PLC that was controlling the wire USB Wi-Fi loop, and it took weeks of planning, working with manufacturing to find a window where we could do it. And I think it got canceled at least once, because again, manufacturing is very dynamic. If your production plan changes, you have to adapt. So it took weeks to do a firmware upgrade that takes minutes. So if it has to be done, we'll figure out a way. But again, it's a risk. If it's something minor that it's not really a apparent risk, then we live with it. We have other controls.
Sure, that makes sense. Kim, how does Dragos look at issues like that within the technology and services area?
Yeah, it's a great point what David brought up, and also what Jose talked about. So it is a challenge. You don't just want to upgrade your PLC firmware because there's a vulnerability. So the way that we tackle it is we don't just provide, here's the mitigation advice from the vendor, which is of course upgrade to the latest firmware. We provide alternative mitigation advice as well that's linked to these vulnerabilities that say, you know what, if you just block this port to everything that doesn't need access to it, you're probably fine. We'll provide that mitigation advice as well. That's something that's very unique to what we do because it's not sourced from the vendor. The vendors often don't provide that. Some do. It's very rare. So we have some OT experts that understand how how the vulnerability works, and also understand how the actual technology needs to work to facilitate the process. And we can give you advice basically on that, just based on what we know you can do to mitigate, because that's usually the option you're going to take when it comes to remediation. It's really the mitigation option.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Chris Woodring asks, can Amgen share what steps they undertook to prep and enable their SOC to understand and respond to incidents impacting OT? David, maybe I'll throw that one to you.
Sure, and I think also Darren has something to say about that. I think Jose also hit on it. There are some events that the SOC will be the first one to see, as we have a SIEM in place where we centralize all the logging, but ultimately the SOC can only go so far. You need to have a site presence. So it is through a site security engineer. We have at least one on each site. Those individuals will follow up, to make sure that it's a true positive, not a false positive on any type of event. Darren, you want to add anything?
Yeah. So one of the things we did first was understand what playbooks and the way that the SOC operates. And then depending on the level of alert, the type of alert, we had to understand how it fit into the current playbook that the SOC has and potentially modify it specific for OT. Now we enrich that data with some of our OT security engineers, as well as working with our incident response team as well to make sure that they're in the loop and understanding of the playbooks as well. This way, so everybody's in line and following the same playbook specific to these alerts and threats that get detected in OT. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Larry from the audience asks, how do you deal with typical OS upgrades for manufacturing equipment, given that often suppliers do not permit inline OS upgrades? Especially from a sustainability perspective, it's not an avenue that you could repeat frequently in a realistic way unless you had mutual and contractual agreements. What is your view on this? Who would like to answer this? Should we start with Jose, perhaps?
I guess. I don't know if I have a good answer for this one. Yeah, we run into this all the time, right? There are vendors that when you talk to them, they say, no, you cannot patch it because it will break my system. And we fall back to the same thing. We have to mitigate it. I think the whitelisting software is one great example where we can make sure that nothing that's not supposed to be running should be running there. Some systems, and again, this might not be realistic all the time, we just don't put it on the network, period. We have a few of those here on our side in ARI. Well, if you have to do anything, you have to basically walk all the way down there and work that locally. So you won't be able to remote in or anything like that. I know a couple of them that we have that are actually, hasn't been the decision to be made. So yeah, it's an ongoing project. I think that's basically how to figure out how to work around that is Darren's job. So he can probably give a better answer. That's the guy I go to.
I actually like your response of pull it off the network. Ultimately, you want to take a risk-based approach. Why are you trying to do an OS upgrade in the first place? But look at what the impact is and what are the other mitigating things you can do around it. Can you harden the system anymore? Can it be moved to a more secure network segment, or can you add additional segmentation to the network? to reduce the attack surface on that. Again, you have to take a risk-based approach and understand the impact around it, because ultimately, if the vendor's not willing to support that, you might run into some other issues as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Kim, doesn't this have a lot to do with that contextual information coming out of the platform about how to respond to mitigation? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going back to the 5 critical controls, there's a couple of things. You have multiple controls that are in place to try to protect your systems. And that, again, doesn't mean upgrading the operating system. The vendor doesn't support it, you're probably not going to want to do it. But if you have a defensible architecture, this is lockdown, that might be unplugging it from the network. But if it does have to be plugged in, you at least need monitoring. That's where monitoring comes in. So if you're able to see that, you can see exactly what's going to it. Is it vulnerable? Yes. Have we accepted the risk? Yes. But we know that we have eyes on it, all the time, 24/7.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Max had a follow-up question to the PLC firmware question. Perhaps Kim, we'll stick with you on this one. Why would someone update the PLC firmware? If the PLC is functioning without any issues, what are the reasons for updates?
So sometimes there is no reason. It just depends. It depends on your risk appetite for your organization. It depends on regulatory compliance in many industries. So if the process is functional, there's no external factors, and you just assess that you accept the risk of that, you can actually, in the vulnerability identification, in the vulnerability record in Dragos platform, you can say risk accepted, put your reason in there. You're not going to see it again. And I think that's a valid option. That's why we have it in there for this. But if there are external factors where it does make sense to patch, then you can. But again, we try to provide as much mitigation advice as we can as well, since we know upgrading the firmware is really not the thing that you're going to jump to, especially if that device is working.
Right, but we provide the ability to kind of capture the reasons behind it too, so that when you go back, you're able to see those things. That makes
absolutely
sense.
Yeah. So if you need to run a report of, where have I closed this is mitigated, you put a mitigation in place, because you might want to validate that your controls you put in place to mitigate are functioning. You can do that. But then also, if you say, what have we accepted in terms of risk, in case you have like an annual cycle or something, you need to go back and review any type of risk accepted vulnerabilities.
Sure. Awesome. Okay, that takes care of our Q&A section, and we've gone over time, but I know a lot of our folks have stayed with us because you guys have given such great information and a lot of insight into what Amgen is dealing with and how Dragos helps support companies like Amgen along these journeys. So thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. And we look forward to continuing these conversations. So to our audience, if you have any questions that you didn't get answered today, please feel free to reach out to us and check out the recording of this webinar. We will likely share at least some of the slides as well. So look for that in your email inbox. And don't forget to join us for more webinars as we move forward. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you,
Jennifer.